You might not know this, but land grants can change lives. I want to tell you about my friend Walt Bonham. When I first met Walt 3 years ago, he was looking for an opportunity. He was working for a small juice bar startup in downtown Mansfield, Ohio, his hometown. But that was no place for a man with Walt's skill and abilities. This guy has a business degree, and he's managed more than a dozen employees at a time in his life. He was hustling for this tiny little startup for what amounted to less than minimum wage because he had been served a terrible injustice. A few years ago, he was finishing up a business meeting when all of a sudden, out of the blue, 4 men started to harass the sister of the man that he was meeting with, who was waiting for them in a car outside of the bar. Walt rushed out to their defense, to her defense, and he found himself suddenly being faced down by 2 very large, very drunk, very angry white men who backed him up across the parking lot and then pounced on him. They started kicking and punching. Now, Walt warned them off, and he was scared for his life. And 2 things you need to know about this night. First, even though Walt was at a bar, he had not been drinking. Because second, he was carrying a gun. Something he'd done legally for the previous 9 years. And Walt feared for his life. And the men were punching and kicking, and so he pulled his gun and he started to fire. And even though he hit one of the men twice, the assault continued. And they overpowered Walt, and they took his gun from him, and they turned it on him. Now, Walt knew he'd emptied all 5 chambers before they got the gun from him, but the men did not. And then the police arrived, and things went from bad to worse for Walt. Because even though he was so injured from this assault that he spent several days in the hospital, he was the only one arrested that night, and he was charged with a second-degree felony. Long story short, Walt didn't have the resources to mount the kind of defense that this case required, and the lawyer he hired didn't tell him as much, and he showed up on the day of the trial to learn that his lawyer wasn't calling any witnesses and had allowed a jury of all white, non-gun owners to be seated. So Walt told me he knew if he let the trial go forward that day, he was not walking out of that courtroom a free man. So he was essentially coerced into pleading to a lesser 4th-degree violent felony charge, a charge that wouldn't come with any jail time, but a charge that would prevent him from ever getting a job again. And when Walt realized that he was unemployable, he returned to his hometown of Mansfield and he started looking for an opportunity. And that's when I met him in the sandwich shop. He was just looking for an opportunity. And I'd been thinking a lot about the value of opportunity in those days, about opportunity as a kind of social justice. Because I'd been thinking a lot about justice and what it means to bring justice. And I noticed a couple of things. The first is that we often conclude that simply removing that injustice is sufficient to deal with the harm that it's done. So you might think about slavery, terrible injustice. We ended slavery. Or Jim Crow segregation, also terrible injustice, and we made it illegal. But I'm not sure that's ever enough. Because second, the most egregious injustices keep happening to the same groups of people in the United States over time. And I'm speaking now as a U.S. historian. These things keep happening to African Americans and Native Americans. And so I was wondering whether removing the injustice was ever sufficient in itself. And I was thinking about where opportunity might fit in the matrix of social justice and human improvement. As a U.S. historian, I knew that land-grant universities like the Ohio State University, where I worked, had been critical social justice institutions in the 19th century. They prepared a nation of 18th century farmers for the opportunities of the 20th century world. I mean, if you think about it, opportunity as social justice is kind of the land-grant DNA. And so I'd been thinking about how I might enlist urban food systems as precisely this kind of economic opportunity. And I'd already been working with Deanna West Torrance, another Mansfield native and the founder and executive director of the North End Community Improvement Collaborative. Deanna had already led her community through a planning process in which they had identified food systems as a viable, asset-based economic development solution, something that they wanted to do. And Deanna had already started building community gardens, and she'd already started training urban farmers. Deanna and I were both interested in food systems because we were interested in finding a more just solution to the problem of food insecurity. We both knew that the delivery of that free box of tomatoes was insufficient to address the real cause there, which was in fact household wealth or income. Enter the Microfarm Project, an urban farming project created by a land grant to deliver social justice by capturing food dollars to grow individual and household wealth in food insecure communities. It starts with the Microfarm, a right-sized urban production site, small enough for an individual or a household to operate, large enough to bring a profit. The right size is about 1/3 of an acre, 5,500 square feet of growing area, half of which is under 2 high tunnels for extended season grow. The Microfarm is successful because it focuses on growing the very most popular crops. So the things on everybody's grocery list: tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, greens. There's about 12 crops in all. But a single microfarm is too small by itself to be successful, and we knew this. The microfarm only becomes successful when it's part of a system of microfarms, which can aggregate production from multiple sites. And this is accomplished through an old school farmer cooperative, a microfarmer cooperative. The cooperative can then buy, aggregate, brand, and market the produce, ideally before a plant even goes in the ground. And the cooperative marketer can in this way coordinate crop plans with buyer needs, creating a whole lot more certainty for our farmers and for our buyers. And the whole system is designed to simplify farming so our microfarm producers can focus on growing the very best quality produce that they can. When the whole system is in full operation, a microfarm has the potential of delivering up to $35,000 of supplemental household income. Those are real dollars in places where dollars are needed. Microfarming in opportunity-poor households to deliver wealth in food insecure neighborhoods. And this isn't just an abstract idea. Since 2019, Deanna and I have been building this system into the landscape of Mansfield, Ohio, with a $1 million matching grant that Ohio State University received from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. We wanted to see if the idea had legs, and what a ride it's been. Since 2019, we've trained 12 new microfarm producers to grow market-quality crops. We have built 10 new microfarms in Mansfield and the surrounding countryside for these farmers to work in. And my microfarm producers have already served up hundreds of pounds of fresh, local, organic produce to households and cafeterias and restaurants from Mansfield to Columbus. And they've provided an additional hundreds of pounds of surplus for the food insecure households that surround these microfarms in the community. We prepare for 2021 with the whole system for the very first time, fully in place, ready to see what it can do. 10 new microfarm businesses owning 1 new farmer cooperative, the Richland Grow Up, as part of a community university vision of urban agriculture for economic development. The Ohio State University will continue to provide and leverage its research expertise and its commitment to social justice to ensure this project is a success. And we hope to provide a new model of urban farming that can deliver wealth in the places in the United States where wealth is needed, and hopefully to model the kinds of community engagements that land-grant universities should be participating in. And my friend Walt Bonham, He formed a business called the Food Lab, and he trained to be one of our microfarm producers. When the Ohio State University needed a contractor to source and assemble our microfarms, Walt Bonham's Food Lab bid for and won that contract. So when I put in my first microfarm on the Ohio State Mansfield campus back in 2017, it took me about 3 months to put that thing in. Walt Bonham's Food Lab put those things up now in 3 days. When Deanna West Torrance was gifted 12 acres of industrial brownfield, she needed a manager to prepare that site for her, to put in electricity and water, and to build, assemble, and manage 4 microfarms. She hired the Food Lab, and Walt Bonham got the NECIC urban farm built. NECIC was happy over the last few years when its farmers market would bring in $2,000 in sales. Last summer, they brought in over $17,000 in sales, and we're just getting started. Walt Bonham's Food Lab is one of the 10 microfarm producers in the Richland Grow-Op, and so he provides his share of the needed aggregate for the market. And the Food Lab is about to go under contract with the Richland Grow-Op to provide a strategic operations and marketing plan to ensure their success in 2021 and beyond. So my friend Walt Bonham is no longer looking for an opportunity. Ohio State University provided an opportunity, and Walt Bonham seized it. And now he's creating opportunity for his own neighborhood. And he's building wealth. Wealth for himself, for his family, and for his community. Now, Walt has not resolved the legal injustice that set him back a few years ago. But guess what? He's soon going to have the means to try. And he's just one of several inspiring microfarm stories that are blooming right now in Mansfield, Ohio, and proof that land grants can change lives. So stay tuned. And while it's pretty obvious, I'm really excited about the microfarm project and about my friend Walt and about his successes. The real story here is about land grants and social justice. When the Morrill Land Grant Act was passed in 1862, it delivered social justice by providing opportunity. It prepared a nation of 18th century farmers for the opportunities of the industrial world. We stand at a similar inflection point today. And if land-grant universities looked around their communities and they identified geographies where people were most at risk, and they worked with those communities to develop sustainable systems to mitigate those risks, like the microfarm system, and bring opportunity and deliver social justice, they will have ample work to fulfill the promise of the land-grant university in the 21st century. Thank you.